great to be here. By the way, I'm a little warm, so I'm going to take my coat off. It is so fun to be here. You know, can I take this out? Yes. It's very fun for me to be here. A couple of weeks ago, I had to do this Bill Maher show real time. I don't know, and if you, probably none of you watched that show. I hope. But this is the show on HBO, and I was on Dan with. Here's the level of balanced panel. Okay, I was on with Michael Moore. By the way, no relation. Michael Moore, Alec Baldwin, and Maxine Waters. but I creamed them in the debate, so it's fun to be with people who believe in the free market, not the communist system. You know, how many of you read the Wall Street Journal editorial page pretty regularly? Bless you for doing that. You know, I really feel like in these times where we're under assault from the left, that there's three major places in the media that are holding up the fort. Wall Street Journal editorial page, right? Fox News. How many of you watch Fox News pretty regularly? And I'm going to say this unapologetically, Rush Limbaugh. Thank God for those three. Now, I want to say one other thing, Dan, which is that thank you for the very nice introduction. I think the state think tanks are so important to the movement. I go around the country, I've talked to groups around the country, and these are so vitally important to winning the war on idea. And I think what you guys have done in Washington is just so fantastic, and I want to just salute the people who are on the board and the benefactors of this organization, because as I go around the country, one of the things that puts our side at a handicap is that the left is funded by government. You know, the unions, the trial lawyers, the welfare lobby, they don't get their money from charitable contributions. They get their money from government. In fact, this is what's so evil about this $1 trillion stimulus bill that we just passed. This bill is not about stimulating the economy. What this bill was about is funneling hundreds of billions of dollars into the AFL-CIO, the teachers' unions, all the groups that made Acorn. You all know Acorn. Acorn gets money in this bill. And of course, what's that money going to be used for? It's going to be used to, you know, defeat free market candidates and defeat free market ideas, which makes it so important now not only to support groups like the Washington Policy think tank, but also to increase, if you can. And even though this is a tough time financially for all of us, given what we're up against right now, it is so critical that you support groups like the Heritage Foundation, Cato, Washington Policy Center, and all these organizations that are promoting liberty, because quite frankly, the barbarians are at the gates right now, and we have to fight back. Now, I'll tell you kind of one fun story. I do, as I said, I go around the country talking to these groups, and one of the most fun events that I've had, that I told Dad he should do this in Washington, is one of your sister groups, the Independence Institute in Colorado, has this wonderful event every year that they call the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Party. And what they do at this party is they drink, and they smoke, and they shoot. Not in that order, okay? Not in that order. So you go out to a gun club. I mean, Dan, you just got to do this. You go out to a gun club, and about 200 people come to this, women and kids. And you know, how many of you have gone out to a gun club before? I've never done this thing before, but you know, what they do is they have these catapults, and they shoot these, you know, clay pigeons in the air, and you try to shoot them down. And most people are shooting down 90% of these. And you know, I'm from Chicago. I'm very culturally literate. I've never done this thing before. So I'm shooting at these things, and I hit maybe 2 out of 100. You know, 2 out of 100. They're calling me a girly man and so on. It's very frustrating. So then it's time for the lunch. And this gentleman who runs the Colorado Independence Institute, he has to introduce me now after this miserable performance that I've just put on shooting. And so he says, this is Steve Moore, and he says, he alleges to write for the Wall Street Journal editorial. He says, but we just watched Steve Moore shoot a gun this morning. And after watching him shoot a gun, I think he really writes for the New York Times. I promise, I do not write for the New York Times. I write for the Journal. and it's a great place to be. All right, I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with the economy, and I want to make this kind of fun and lively. And by the way, feel free to interrupt. I'm going to kind of go through this presentation. It's really based on the book that we wrote. And by the way, just so you don't get too depressed, the title of the book is The End of Prosperity, but I have good news. We just signed a contract with Simon & Schuster about how we can get out of this crisis. So we're going to have the upbeat message in the next book. But the point is that we are in this crisis because we violated the principles of sound, free enterprise economics that are so central to making the economy work and to making a nation prosper. And these ideas are not complicated. We talk in the book about what we call the 4 pillars of prosperity. And those are very simple, right? You all know them. I mean, I'm kind of preaching to the converted here, but those 4 pillars of prosperity are: number 1, keep tax rates low, right? Keep tax rates low. Low tax rates are much more pro-growth than raising tax rates. The second is a sound currency, a strong and stable dollar, which is something I would argue probably that's what we violated the most, that principle. If you were to ask me who's the single person most responsible for the condition we're in right now, it's not Barack Obama, it's probably Alan Greenspan for what he did with monetary policy, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Third is free trade. Free trade trumps protectionism. If you don't, people who don't believe that, if you look, we have a chapter in our book that talks about the Great Depression. The trigger point of the Great Depression, of course, was, how many of you heard of the Smoot-Hawley tariff? But that's what caused the breakdown of the global trading system, was created by this massive new tariff that was passed in the early 1930s. And then finally, keeping government spending under control and keeping debt under control. And one of the reasons we wrote this book, The End of Prosperity, and we started writing this 9 months ago. We knew things were going to be bad, but we didn't predict that they were going to be this bad. But we could see that all of those policy dials that for the last 25 years, for the most part, have been turned in the right direction, all of a sudden we could see that they were all going to turn in the wrong direction. And I would argue that just about everything that we have done in Washington, and this starts with George Bush and then it has continued under Barack Obama, every response to the crisis has made it worse. Every single thing that we have done. And it starts with bailout that we passed, remember the $700 billion bailout, and then we bailed out the auto companies, and then we bailed out Bear Stearns, and then we bailed out Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and AIG, and on down the line. I mean, these bailouts have gotten so out of control, by the way, that this last week the porn industry came to Washington for a handout. So, I mean, I'm not making this up, by the way. The porn industry wants a handout, wants a bailout. And so those policies have been a complete catastrophe. They've only made things worse by taking money from healthy companies and people who are productive and giving them to unhealthy companies. And in other words, the way I put it when I'm on these TV shows, we've moved from a country of capitalism, which believes in the survival of the fittest, to an economic philosophy of the survival of the unfittest. And when you have that, you get really bad results. So I want to talk a little bit about what causes growth, what has worked in the past and what hasn't. And then as I go along in this, it's kind of more fun for me, I think, for you too. If you have any questions or comments, raise your hand. I want this to be very conversational. So let me start with this. And this is basically a picture of the U.S. stock market from 1960 till 2008. Now you'll notice here I don't have what's happened in the last 6 months in the stock market here. But what I wanted to show you with this chart, and by the way, the black line is the S&P 500, and the blue line is the S&P 500. But what I've done here is I've adjusted the returns for inflation. Because for those of you, almost everyone in this room, who is an investor, when you make an investment, you're interested in your after-inflation rate of return, not your before-inflation rate of return. Now, the important point about this chart is you can see here that, let's focus on the blue line, okay? Do you know, you see the V shape here, it's very pronounced. From 1967 through 1982, the stock market went through a great collapse. In fact, one of the things that annoys me about the current conversation about the economy, when people say that Barack Obama is inheriting the worst economic crisis since Franklin Roosevelt, that is flat out wrong. What Ronald Reagan inherited in 1980 was much worse than what we faced, because what Ronald Reagan faced was not just a 6-month recession. What he faced was an 11-year recession. In fact, I would make the case to you that this period here is essentially a mini depression that we had in the 1970s.